Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, we'll be discussing the case of Laci Peterson. Laci being 8 months pregnant and disappearing on Christmas Eve back in 2002 shocked the nation. More surprising was the fact that her seemingly loving husband, Scott, was convicted of her murder. Scott's supporters love to say that it was the media who made the public hate Scott, and the fact that he had an affair didn't make him a killer. But if you dig deeper into all the circumstantial evidence against Scott, you'll find that no one else could be responsible for this crime. We'll be discussing some of that circumstantial evidence in today's video. Things like Scott's alibi, the fact that he had said that he was golfing before changing his story to fishing the day that she disappeared. Scott not only refused to take a polygraph, he also refused to get Laci's dental records to Modesto Police Department. He kept making excuses and saying things like, oh, I don't even know where her dentist is. Come to find out, him and Laci had the same dentist. It's also strange that after Scott came home and couldn't find Laci, even though her car was still there and the dog was there with his leash on, he didn't ever try calling her. He immediately called her mother, Sharon, and said that Laci was missing. So let's take a deeper dive into the case. And before I start, I will say that I know the media can be too much and overzealous and even print false stories. But I think it was so much deeper than, oh, Scott just had an affair, so let's all gang up on Scott. It was all of his lies and lies and lies and lies again. He lied to everyone. He lied to his family. He lied to Laci's family. He lied to the world. I think Scott Peterson is exactly where he needs to be, and here's why. Laci Denise Rocha was born in Modesto, California on May 4th, 1975, to Sharon and Dennis Rocha. They also had an older son named Brent, and even though Laci and Brent had a few years between them, the siblings were very close. Sharon and Dennis would eventually split up, and Sharon would start dating a guy named Ron Gransky. Ron would practically help raise Laci and Brent, and they looked at Ron as like a second father. Growing up, Laci loved helping her mother garden, and from looking at old home movies of Laci, it seemed like she had a great personality and was really fun to be around. Sharon also said that her daughter had a huge heart. After graduating high school, Laci would attend a university in California and major in ornamental horticulture. In 1994, Laci would meet a man at a restaurant that he was working at. His name was Scott Peterson. Laci would give Scott her phone number and would later tell her mother, Sharon, that she met the man she was going to marry. The two began dating, and a few years later, in 1997, they would get married. But it wouldn't take long for Scott to have his first extramarital affair. Laci and Scott would open a cafe in San Luis Obispo, but would eventually sell the business and move back to Modesto to be closer to Laci's family. Laci would start working as a part-time substitute teacher, and Scott would take on a full-time job as a fertilizer salesman. A few years into their marriage, Laci was desperately wanting a baby and found out that she was pregnant in 2002. She was thrilled, but Scott not so much. Laci's sister, Rosemarie, said that when she asked Scott if he was ready for fatherhood, he said that he was hoping for infertility. On December 24th, 2002, Laci was 8 months pregnant and excited to become a new mother. The Petersons were going to name their son Connor. On that Christmas Eve morning, Scott said that he left Laci at home around 9:30 a.m. He said she was going to walk the dog at a nearby park and mop and do a couple other little things. Scott then drove 90 miles away to the Berkeley Marina to put his boat in the water. Scott leaves at around 2:15 and doesn't get back home until about 5. Now, when he gets back home, Laci is gone. Her car is still there, and the dog Mackenzie is there with his leash still attached. This is a very important aspect of this case. After Scott gets home and realizes Laci is not there, he doesn't once try to call her cell phone and see where she is. He washes his clothes, takes a shower, and calls Laci's mother, Sharon, to tell her that Laci is missing. Then a few months later, tragically, the bodies of Laci and Connor would be found on the shores of the San Francisco Bay, almost exactly where Scott Peterson said he was on the day that Laci disappeared. That in itself is extremely telling. The bodies of your wife and son were found exactly where you said you were when they disappeared. Well, not at first. Remember, at first, he told a few people that he was golfing, not fishing. I think he wanted to try to distance himself as far away from that bay as he could. But once he realized that people were going to want receipts or any evidence that he was golfing that day and he didn't have any, he realized he had to say where he was, that he was at the bay. Investigators immediately started getting suspicious of Scott. It didn't mean that he was a killer or had anything to do with her disappearance, but his behavior was all wrong. Scott told police that the decision to go fishing that morning was made that morning. He was either going to go golfing or go fishing, but investigators found that he had bought a 2-day fishing license on the 20th for the days of the 23rd and the 24th. Seems a little bit more premeditated than just a last-minute decision. And remember, this boat is a secret boat. Nobody knew that Scott bought it. It was unregistered and he paid for it in cash. Investigators believe that Laci was likely killed at her home, but there wasn't a lot of evidence to show that a crime was even committed there. But police believe that Laci was either smothered or strangled, and in that case, in that type of a murder, there isn't going to be a lot of evidence left behind. We saw that in the Chris Watts case. Scott also had a lot of time after she disappeared to clean up before his house was thoroughly searched. On December 26, 2 of Laci's friends said they thought it was odd that Scott kept vacuuming and re-vacuuming the laundry area. Something else strange. Scott told police that Laci was going to be walking their dog at a nearby park, but Laci's OBGYN, yoga teacher, and neighbors said that Laci was too far along in her pregnancy. She hadn't been out walking their dog Mackenzie for weeks. On the morning that Laci disappeared, a neighbor said they saw Scott loading something heavy into his truck. Scott said it was just umbrellas that he was wanting to store at his warehouse. The only thing is Scott had those umbrellas in the back of his car, but he never actually unloaded them at his warehouse. He took all this time to wrap them in tarps and put them in his car to take him to his warehouse, but he said he forgot to put them there. What I think happened, and investigators and prosecutors also think happened, is that he noticed that a neighbor saw him load Laci's body in the back of his car, so he put the umbrellas in there to kind of disguise her body. And I know that Scott didn't really confess to this crime, but I think him telling his mistress that he lost his wife weeks before she was actually, lost is about as close as confessing as you're going to get. What kind of coincidence is that? And yes, Scott had an affair with Amber, but it wasn't just the fact that he had an affair that made investigators suspicious. For example, during one of Laci's vigils, he was talking to Amber on the phone and saying he was in Paris and that the crowd celebration was huge. I want you to just think about that for a minute. He's at a vigil for his missing pregnant wife. Her family members are all devastated. Friends are devastated. Strangers are devastated, crying and sick with worry, while he's upbeat, talking to his mistress and carrying on this charade like everything's fine. It was not just the fact that he had an affair. It was all the little things that Scott put into it. He would also put their house up for sale and sell Laci's car. This is only some of the circumstantial evidence that got Scott convicted. Keep checking back for part 2 of this video and let me know in the comments if there's anything important I'm missing. Do you think Scott Peterson is guilty or innocent?